But a lot of times that the sprite sheets that you find that somebody else has already made are not set up for like a continuous cycle. They're more like multiple cycles, like here's the jump, here's the run, here's the punch, or what, whatever. But you can still use it, especially if it's divided up in such a way that they're just strips. Because you could say, similar to what I did in this one, this is a long image, and it's just going on the x-axis. There's no multiple rows or anything like that. But I'll explain in a minute how that works. So in the case of, say, this guy, what I did was I found the image and I downloaded it. And I noticed that it is 8 images that cycle. And so we have to set it up a certain way to do that. So what I'm going to do is go into Blender here, and I gotta switch my thing over here, don't I?
And while you're switching, someone in chat was asking if there would be a way to set it up so that a user could trigger, flipping through the frames. It's not something we have right now, but we've talked about having, some sort of basic triggers and interactivity that we can, put into Spoke, and that would be a good example of something you could do. Yeah, like when you click this thing or when you enter this space, set the UV offset of a thing like that. Those are kinds of simple things that you can probably do a lot with. So that would be pretty cool.
Yeah. So what I do is I start out with a square plane like this, and I just leave it at the origin because this is going to help me, get the. I don't know. I came up with my own way of doing this. Your mileage may vary. You may find a better way to do this. And by the way, there are also a number of add-ons for both like Photoshop and also for Blender to render out an animation into a sprite sheet. I'd encourage you, if you have your own animation and you want to turn it into something like that, take a look. The Blender community is amazing, and they always have really cool add-ons. A lot of them free. So,
and since these are just GLTF files, if someone wants to make a little tool that
does
you
this?
put in a sprite sheet and set some values and it spits out a GLTF file, that'd be really.
I'm all
really
for
fun.
it, and we will promote it, and we may even give you a shout out here. I'm sure we will. So what I'm going to do is just make a quick material for this. So I'm okay with just the principal BSDF shader that happens by default when you make a new material. But what I am going to do is add an image texture and find that image that I made. Now I don't know if you can see what I have up right now, but I'm just going to navigate to my pictures, and I had this guy, it was called Flipbook Walk, and I'm going to plug it in just to the color, and now you're going to see it's all wrong because this image is actually a weird dimension. This image happens to be, and a way to know in here, a quick way to find out what the image dimensions are is if you go to the editor that's called, that we're in right now, it's the image editor. You can go to this little hamburger menu, choose image. I have to first get the.
And then I assume the default UVs on the plane in Blender are just going to be 0 to 1 in the corners.
Yeah.
So it's going to span the entire image no matter what.
It's just stretching it across the whole thing. But if you go to if you load the image up in here in the little drop down, and then go to image resize, it'll actually just tell you what it is. So it's a 1024 by 256 image.
Mm-hmm.
Now, full disclosure, it was not that size when I downloaded it. It was like a little bigger than that, but it was not powers of 2, and game engines and rendering engines like powers of 2. So if you can,
it's not strictly required. It'll kind of get converted at runtime if you don't do it, but it's better if you can. If you're authoring the content anyway, you might as well try to make it a power of 2.
So there it is. There it is in the UV editor, and over here, let me go into this textured mode so I can see it. And what I'm looking at now is not what I want. Now, here's what I did to get this stretched out to the right size. And like I said, you may do it a different way. One way you could do it is to go in the UV editor and just start like moving this until it looks right. But what I actually need is my plane to be a rectangle, not a square. So here's what I did. I knew how many sprites it was divided into, and so what I did was I go into edit mode and I hit Control R, and that will give you, when you roll over an edge, like the tool that will split, that'll cut the mesh. And so when I click once and then move, I could like divide it up. Now, a better way to do it would be to say Control R, and then before I click at all, roll your mouse cursor forward, and it'll divide it up in the number of times you want. So I actually did it into 8 like that. And then I right click, and now I've got it.
But your height is not going to be, it's not the same aspect ratio.
Height's not right. So what I'm going to do is an easy way to get the height right, since I know it's a 1024 by 250. 256 goes into 1024 4 times, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to do Control R again and split this one up 4 times.
Right.
Like that. And now I know one of these corners is the right size. Mm-hmm. And so this is kind of lame, but I just selected the corner and then I hit Control I to select the opposite, and I deleted them. And then
you could probably also scale it.
You could scale it
as well.
Yep. I'm just tinkering in
whatever works.
This is how I do it. And so I did that, and then I just got to get it to the pivot point. So first I got out of edit mode, I should say. I went to object set origin, and then I set it to the center of mass or the center of volume. Doesn't matter. It's flat. So now the pivot is there, and now I can just move it back with Shift S and then selection to cursor. And now it's down there in the middle. So now this is the right size, but its UVs are wrong. UVs, right. So all I have to do now is just pull these down to the bottom, and then it's the right size. And if you're really being particular, you could open up and like...
Yeah, I mean, you could just set, you know exactly what the value should be. So like the bottom ones should be at 1 for the vertical dimension, and then the horizontal dimension should just be 1 over the or divide the number of sprites.
Yeah.
I don't know how many are there.
So that's how I did it. There's 8 total.
Okay, yeah, so 1 or 8.
Now that math will actually come in handy when we add the component to it. So this is pretty much done. Now it's not going to be transparent yet. And if you're wondering how to do that, you got to do 2 things here. This image does have alpha, as you can see the checker background here. So we can plug the alpha output here into the alpha of this shader node. So I can plug that into alpha. Now it will be transparent, but not quite yet. You have to open up the settings over here under options and set the blend mode not to opaque, but to alpha clip. Now you could use alpha blend if it had all kinds of soft transparency, but it's more expensive.
The difference between those two is just going to be like alpha clip is on or off. So it's going to say like, okay, set some threshold, you set the value, and then anything below that threshold is just going to be completely transparent. Anything above will be completely opaque.
This has nice a slider because I can if it has an ugly edge like this, I can play with the slider and kind of trim it a little bit until it looks smoother.
And if you can get away with using clip, it's better, both because it's cheaper, but also you're going to run into less of those issues with, I think we've talked about this maybe in the past, but like overlapping transparency. If you have multiple objects that are alpha blend and they're overlapping each other, you can get some weird artifacts where, you see them cut out incorrectly or you see through them like you weren't expecting to. Unfortunately, that's like really hard problem to solve in a generic way. Yep. The best way you can do is like if your assets can support alpha clip and you can do that, use alpha clip. Only use blending when you actually have, semi-transparent things or gradients or shadows or something like that where you actually need to have the in between transparency.
But even that fire one that I showed in hubs, had all kinds of smooth alpha on it. I just set it to alpha clip and
that would look better with blend. And if you want to do that, that's fine too. That you just have to be aware of when you're using it to make sure not to overlap it and that sort of stuff.
Also, bear in mind you can turn on backface culling here so that it would not draw the back of this if you were looking at it from the other side. In the case of a 2-dimensional looking sprite in hubs, I'm cool with seeing both sides. In fact, it'd be kind of cool. That way I could like move it around and face it the other way if I wanted. Simulate a crowd. I don't know. There's a lot of cool things you could do.
This could be a fun avatar also.
Oh man, somebody could make an awesome like crowd scene. Kind of like the way they used to do them in like old EA games like Madden and stuff. Like have a crowd of sprite people that are like cheering in the background. But anyway, this should work fine. The one thing I do want to do before I export this, or actually I still have to set up the scroll component, but it is a little bit shiny. And so if in hubs there's a light, not only will you see the shininess on the surface here, you might see it on the transparent part. It depends on how the shader works, but just turn the roughness all the way up so that so you don't end up with this glossy.
Can you use the background shader with alpha in Blender? I forget.
I don't think so.
I don't think it has an alpha input.
It doesn't
right?
have an alpha input, and I wish it did. So that's kind of a bummer. But there are probably ways of using a mix shader to combine transparency and that, but at that point it may not be cheap anymore, so this is okay. Now, I can't just do what we did in a previous tutorial where I go to it and I add a component called UV scroll, set a number, and be done with it. Because if I set this to have like a speed of 1 or something, what it's going to actually do, I won't bother showing in hubs, but what it'll actually do is just scroll this like this.
Yeah, it'll just continuously scroll through, and so you'll see the scenes, which is a cool effect in and of itself.
If I do it fast enough,
yeah.
That's not quite what I want. So there's this other setting, and this is really what we're interested in showing today. Underneath speed is increment. And so it's like, how much do you want this UV to slide? You know,
in what increments
in each step? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to leave the speed at 1, only on X. There is no Y. It's never going to go to another row. So this is actually a really easy one. The increment is the tricky part. And really what I do is I just say, well, how many steps is it? Right? So this is 8 steps. So I need 1/8. So the nice thing about Blender is you can actually go over to this as if you were going to type a number and instead type 1 divided by 8, enter, and that's the number I need. So it's actually rounding it. It's 0.125, but it's rounding it to 0.13. And now
I think it might even just be showing the rounded number.
Yeah. It's actually, when I click on it, it says 0.125. So
yep.
That's good to know when you look in the UV scroll example, because it says 1.3. It might be confusing. But that's it. That's all I need to do is add that one component to this mesh. The only thing I'll do is actually just slide it up so that it's kind of on the ground. I did that in edit mode so that the pivot stays at the ground. And this guy will animate when I export him. So I'm going to go ahead and export him as a GLB. And I'm not actually going to do it because I already did it. But then I just drag and drop it in here and it works. And if you want him to run faster or walk faster, just set the speed higher. So if I set the speed to 2 and export him, let me go to, where am I exporting him? I'll export him in the same place that I did the other one. So I'll go to I have a little directory called flipbook. Let's call this flipbook walk 2 and make sure my hubs components are on. I know you can't see everything I'm doing right now because it doesn't pop up, but let me switch now over to here. So this was the original. That's basically what I just made at a speed of 1, just like this. Now, this guy that I'm about to drop in is the same exact thing going at a speed of 2. So he's the same, but it's just playing through faster.
Yep.
Which is kind of neat if you want to make a crowd and they were moving at different speeds. But they're using the same texture, so it's not really any more expensive.
Right, exactly. Yeah, multiple instances of this are still using the same texture.